Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Now, you know what I'm going to say next. I'm going to ask you, do you have your notepad? Do you have your pen? If not, pause the video right now and grab those, because I want you to make a commitment that you will jot down some notes, that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about. You've got to implement to drive your business forward. I am here to tell you that your policies, the policies of your business, perhaps the policies you put in place, are terrible. They're awful. Frankly, they suck. And I don't even have to know what they are. I know, let's just agree to this at least, they are either unnecessary or unenforceable. And how can I say that? Well, Dr. Stephen Covey says that where mores are sufficient, laws are unnecessary. Where mores are insufficient, laws are unenforceable. I want to delve into that a little bit, and I want you to grasp this. My objective of this here conversation is to get you to agree with that observation and then act accordingly within your organization. So many managers think that policies are really important, and I would argue that organizations that are continually quoting policy and rely heavily on policy, that is symptomatic of poor management. Have you been to some sort of business and they've got signs of the various policies posted all over the place? This is a symptom of poor management. You don't need so many policies for your customers, for you and everything. There are better ways to do this. And people who are new to management, they sometimes think that their job as a manager, now they are the central authority, they're in charge, and that it's incumbent upon them to put rules and regulations in place. So let's look at, first of all, what do we mean when we say a policy? A policy I would define as something that you document and you pass along and communicate to other stakeholders in your organization, meant to diminish or prevent undesirable behavior or outcomes. Now you might say, well, no, Michael, I have a policy that is a good policy. I have a full 100% money back satisfaction guarantee policy with my customers. And we also have a policy that gives our people an extra couple of days off every year, the longer they've worked there, or something like this. Those are policies. Still, those are put in place meant to diminish poor behaviors, undesirable outcomes, and that kind of thing. Because, and to the degree that they're not, then you could argue that they're more or less just marketing. Like the first example I gave you with the satisfaction guarantee, that can be sort of your official position, but when you document it to make it a policy, then you're really doing that as a means of communicating to your customers as a marketing, trying to influence them that they lower their risk by interacting with you. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with doing that and communicating that. What I'm talking about, getting back to the definition, is when you are putting things in place meant to diminish negative behavior. There's a better way to go about doing that, and that is at the heart of what most policies are. Or in my second example, I said, well, we have the policy about extra days off based on the length of time a person's worked there, and but I would argue again, that's really meant to formally state, hey, you can't just take off as many days as you want, you have to work, and there's only a certain amount of days that you can take off. So we don't have to get too hung up on it, but we do need to sort of establish our definitions so that we can have this discussion. So think of policies, for the purposes of this discussion at least, as those things that you document and communicate with other stakeholders, meant to diminish or eliminate bad behaviors and undesirable outcomes. So all of that is bad because they are either unnecessary or unenforceable. So mores are essentially, it's kind of like etiquette. It's those moral standards that you have in your culture that they're a way of acting. People just act normally because that's just the accepted way that it is in that particular environment. Those are mores. And where you have people in your organization who don't care about any kind of ethics or etiquette, I meant to say, but ethics as well, or they don't really fall back on any of your moral guidelines and your ways of behaving, and they don't believe in those things, then anytime you put a policy in place, these are the very same people who are going to look for loopholes and ways around that policy. And those people that have sufficient mores, those people who do respect the etiquette and the way of behaving in your culture, those people, they don't need a policy, a written policy, or anything communicated by management to uphold that standard. They're going to just do that. And that's why they're unnecessary for that segment of your stakeholder population, your community that interacts with your organization. And they are unenforceable for those that really don't care. Because if they don't care about the mores, if they don't care about the etiquette, the standards, the way of behaving that is just normal and upholds a particular moral character in your organization, they don't care about your policy either. So as soon as your back is turned, so to speak, as soon as you're looking the other way, as soon as no one's noticing, those people are going to go around your policies, and therefore they're unenforceable. They're going to get away with it. And you don't want an organization, you don't want to constantly be looking for that kind of thing and slapping people on the wrist. So I would say that at best, the time you invest in creating policies and upholding policies is a waste of time. And at worst, your policies can be toxic to your business. And how can they be toxic? They are really deleterious to your business because they stifle creativity, they stifle resourcefulness and autonomy and freedom. These are things that you will benefit from in your organization, and the degree to which you stifle those things, you are going to handcuff your organization from otherwise growing in a way that they might be able to if they were afforded the freedom that accompanies trust and empowerment. I suspect some of you are pushing back on this, at least mentally, and you're thinking, well, just a second, Michael, you've always talked about you have to inspect what you expect. You're like an inspector, you're going around and checking that people are upholding or particular behaviors or whatever aren't those policies. And I suppose you could say, well, Michael, you're splitting hairs here, but I want to define the definitions. And maybe there is a little vagueness, there is a little gray area here that we have to define. What I think you're going to notice in your organization is that you have different kinds of personalities, of course, among the various stakeholders and people, team members. And those with more introverted, compliant personalities, they're going to follow your policies to the letter of the law. Just constantly, they will make sure that they uphold those things. And those are the ones that you got to be careful that you are not stifling their resourcefulness. They may have better ways of doing things. They might have a better idea. And if afforded freedom and empowerment to do things their way without a bunch of policies in their way, they might do things better. But because of a compliant and introverted nature, they may not give you that feedback. They may say, well, that's the policy. I don't have control over it. And you might think, well, no, they should come and tell me. If they have a better way, then I would honor that. Yes, that's the key. That's what we want to put in place. And yet I would say to you, because of certain types of personalities, and I keep referring to people who are introverted and very compliant, especially those people who are non-confrontational, they are unlikely to seek you out to criticize and comment on policies. Instead, they're more likely to just acquiesce. They're more likely just to comply. And that isn't necessarily what you want, because your policy will always be imperfect. There will be ways in which your policy, again, stifles resourcefulness or innovation, creativity, and that some people may have a better way of doing things. Remember, you are putting a policy in place. You're using, with your central authority methodology, a means of coming up with a way to try to prevent or mitigate against undesirable behavior and outcome. But when you do that, you can't be omniscient. You don't know what's going through everyone's mind. You can't foresee every single situation where there may be a need for an exception to the rule. And therefore, you will create and document restrictions that will have adverse reactions in your organization. Now, you might say to me, well, Michael, everyone in my organization knows that there's exceptions to every rule. We have rules, we have policies, but we also grant exceptions. I would say, good, you're on the right track, but why not just avoid creating the policy to begin with and say that we have a way of doing things here and encourage people to do that, but there's no black and white. It's not documented formally as a policy. That way, people will be better able to use their own judgment based on circumstances that they understand in every individual case. And you don't have to try to create some perfect policy, rule, or standard operating procedure that covers everything for all people at all times and all conditions and so on. This is what we talk about when we think about the laws the government put in place. They're always putting in new laws and there are unintended consequences. That's what I mean. You may be well intended with your policy, but they will have unintended consequences 100% of the time. And you can imagine that then what happens is people come along and they put in new laws. The government keeps on putting on more and more laws to make sure that the loopholes that those that have insufficient mores are trying to exploit, and they are trying to mitigate against those unintended consequences constantly. But instead of putting in these new laws, if they would just remove things and we would focus instead on upholding a good culture. So that takes me to what should you do instead? What you should do is try to promote and encourage people to uphold a few fundamental principles within your organization that leads to the culture that you want. And we call these core values. So think about core values. Think about the culture that you want in your organization, one of trust. You don't need a policy that says you're not allowed to steal from the company. You're not allowed to steal from one another. You're not allowed to steal from our customers. You're not allowed to lie to customers. You don't need policies that say that. Those should be your part of your culture, and your culture is built upon your core values. So if you have a core value of honesty and transparency, then that's what you promote. That's what you promote to all the people in your organization. And those who don't fit well with that, those who do not like those core values, can choose to exit and not be part of your community. Also, that's what you do when we talk about inspecting what you expect. You inspect your expectation that people are adhering to and upholding your core values. And so when you see somebody who's really deviating from what is expected in terms of mores, in terms of core values, in terms of upholding a culture that you've worked hard to maintain and to grow within your organization, you can pull them aside and you can find out what the reason for that is. And it's not pointing to a policy and showing them the letter of the law and the text and they go, I've been there, I've done this. Trust me, what is going to happen is people will just find the loopholes. They'll look for, well, it didn't say this, it didn't say we couldn't do that. And so they keep trying to exploit those loopholes. Instead, what you pull them aside and you ask them and you say, hey, we have that core value of transparency in our organization, or honesty, and we have this culture of empowerment that we're trying to promote. These are assuming that that's true for your organization. You're going to be quoting in your example whatever it is. But anyway, back to my little role play here. You would pull the person aside and you would say, I noticed you did X, Y, or Z, and that is incongruous with our culture and our core value of transparency. Can you talk to me a little bit about what was going through your head and why you made that decision? Because we want to be able to empower you, but that really had some consequences that were deleterious to the organization, and we don't want that again. Help me understand where you're coming from. The person might go, you know what, that was just a rookie mistake, I won't do that again. Listen to those and then express in writing. Now you can document that this person deviated from a core value, from the culture that you're trying to uphold. And you might say to me at this point, as you're listening to this, you might say, well, isn't that just a policy? Well, if that's your definition of a policy, then fine, fair enough. But I would say the difference is you're still allowing that freedom. Within the culture that we have, with sufficient mores, you're able to go and do what you want. You will have freedom and autonomy and creativity to innovate, to operate without worrying constantly about what are all the rules. And I don't want to constantly be getting my hand slapped for breaking the rule. Instead, continue to guide your people and shape them and mold them according to the culture and the core values that you have. This is what I would strongly advise you to do and embrace and espouse instead of constantly creating policies. So I hope I didn't insult anyone when I told you that a lot of rookie managers think that is very much their job, the definition of management, which is to put in place rules and then to uphold those rules and to track them and inspect those rules and get the rules better and better. I hope that's not insulting to anyone, because that's very commonplace. That's very common among managers, and I think it's wrong. It's very common among politicians. People get in power and you think of them as managing a particular demographic or rather geographic location. They are maybe the mayor or their city council person, or they are a prime minister, a premier, or a president, or whatever, and they think it's my job to put specific rules in place that will help the people. No, do the opposite. Remember, there's always unintended consequences. So you as a manager, accept that, do the opposite, remove rules and start working on foundational principles. Start working on core values, upholding core values. You can agree with me that if a country had really good core values, that they also, you would have immigration toward that country among people who share those core values, and you'd have people go, I don't believe in that stuff. I'm not going to want to live there or whatever. So your community, your business is a form of community. Think about how it is, what culture that do you want, and then just remove all the roadblocks. That is the key. That, in fact, is a definition for management that I like, is you go around removing roadblocks from your people so that they can progress, they can innovate, they can work towards objectives with a lot more autonomy and freedom and liberty, as long as we all are respecting one another. And respect may be a great example of a core value. So think about this. What I want you to do today, your exercise today, is to eliminate at least one policy you have in your organization. You can't tell me that every policy you have, it has to stay. In fact, I would say to you, very few of them need to stay. And instead, think about how you can promote a core value in your organization. Now, maybe you need to visit our video on core values and spend some time working on that first and foremost, because if you don't have a culture that you can rely on your people, and you don't have trustworthy people in your organization, you've got some bigger fish to fry. You've got some bigger problems to have. But the degree to which you do have really quality character people in your organization, you can start knocking down those roadblocks to progress. You can start eliminating policy, and then when you do it, make the announcement. We are going to favor core values, adherence to core values, and upholding our culture, as opposed to constantly quoting policy, because we believe there are always unintended consequences and there are exceptions to every rule. So we don't want to make things officially a rule. We may talk about things like this is a best practice, but they aren't necessarily in place each and every time. There are, and when you say, no, there is a particular thing that we need in place 100% of the time, then that goes to your core value. That is probably founded on a particular value that you have, and hang your hat on that. Work your management around that as opposed to policy. That's where I want to leave it today. I hope you got something out of this. Do you agree with this? Do you completely disagree with this? Do you have a lot of policies? Do you spend the time documenting these? I think of some of the ones that I've written over the years, or I've had other managers on my team write, and I think about all the detail that went into it, and really, it's unnecessary. Remember, at best, it's a waste of your time. At worst, it's actually stifling creativity, resourcefulness, and is toxic to your community, to your environment, to your business. So leave a comment that we can learn from, because we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.